The storm had swallowed Everpine whole. Snow slashed sideways across the windshield like white knives, the wipers barely keeping up. Luke Barrett gripped the steering wheel tighter, his jaw set beneath the brim of his department-issued cap. The cruiser's heater wheezed, pushing warm air into the silence between him and his daughter. 8-year-old Ellie sat bundled in a red coat, her knees tucked up on the seat, humming softly to herself. The tune was off-key and familiar, the same lullaby her mother used to sing before cancer stole the warmth from their home 2 winters ago. They were supposed to be home already. Luke glanced at the dashboard clock. 30 minutes behind. The snow had come early and fast, snarling up the main road. He'd barely made it to the school in time. Now, with visibility down to 20 feet and the roads icing over, he was relying on instinct and muscle memory. As they passed the edge of town, the old sawmill loomed through the white curtain. Abandoned for years, its corrugated metal walls creaked beneath the weight of snow, like the breath of something ancient trying not to be heard. Ellie turned her head toward the window. Her voice was a whisper. "Daddy, did you hear that?" Luke frowned, killing the music. "Hear what?" She tilted her head, her small hand resting on the door handle. "I thought someone was crying." They listened. At first, nothing, just wind. Then it came again, a sound thin and fractured, too broken to be a scream, too raw to be the wind. Luke's stomach turned cold. "Stay in the car," he said, opening the door. Snow punched into him like fists. The cold was immediate, stealing breath from his lungs. He slammed the door shut and moved toward the sound. The wind howled louder the closer he got to the rear of the sawmill. Faint footprints broke the snow, leading around the corner of the building. They were erratic, dragging. Luke unlatched the holster on his hip. "Police," he called out. "Is someone there?" A shape moved in the storm. He stepped forward and froze. A man in a torn grey jacket stood hunched over a German shepherd, his fists rising and falling. The dog was chained to a rusted post, ribs jutting out beneath matted fur. Blood smeared the snow. The animal didn't fight back. She curled around herself, one paw protectively covering her swollen belly. "Hey!" Luke shouted. "Get away from her!" The man turned. Wild eyes, hollow cheeks. No fear, just a flash of calculation before he bolted into the blizzard. Luke gave chase, slipping on ice, boots pounding snow. But within seconds, the man was gone, swallowed by white. A faint object lay in the snow where he had been. Luke scooped it up, a cell phone, smeared in red. "Daddy!" Ellie's voice cut through the storm. Luke turned back towards the mill. She was running toward him, her small boots sinking with every step. "I told you to stay!" His voice caught when he saw her freeze at the sight of the dog. The shepherd lay motionless, chest heaving. Blood crusted her muzzle. Her eyes were open, but unfocused. "Easy," Luke murmured, kneeling beside her. "You're safe now." The dog didn't flinch. She looked past him, at Ellie. Without hesitation, Ellie unwrapped her scarf. Red wool, hand-knitted, too short for a full loop. She knelt beside the dog and gently wrapped it around her trembling neck. "She's cold," Ellie whispered. Luke swallowed hard. "We need to get her to Dr. Harmon's. Now." He lifted the dog carefully. She was lighter than he expected. Bones wrapped in a shivering coat of exhaustion and something harder. Survival. Ellie ran ahead, opening the cruiser's back door. Luke slid the dog onto a blanket, cranked the heater, and glanced at the phone again. The screen was cracked, the battery nearly dead, but a notification blinked. "Cargo lost. Retrieve immediately." He tucked it away. Ellie held the dog's paw as they drove. "She's going to be okay, right?" Luke didn't answer. The veterinary clinic was the only building still glowing at that hour, nestled at the end of Birch Lane. Warm yellow light spilled from behind frosted glass, the word Harmon Veterinary Care etched above the door. Dr. Zoe Harmon looked up as they entered. Early 30s. No nonsense. Hands always busy, even when she wasn't working. "What the hell?" she muttered, pushing aside tools. "Put her here." The shepherd's body shivered on the metal table. Zoe moved fast. IV line, stethoscope, antiseptic wash. She murmured to the dog in low, firm tones, as if words could slow blood loss. "She's pregnant," Zoe said after a moment. "Very close to delivery, but that's not all." She pulled out a handheld scanner and ran it across the dog's neck. A soft beep, then frown. "There's a microchip, but someone wiped the serial. Looks like Federal Canine format. Maybe 6, 7 years old." Luke blinked. "You're telling me she was trained?" "Trained and erased," Zoe said, like someone didn't want her traced. Ellie stood near the table, her hand still wrapped around the dog's paw. "She's special," she said quietly. "I can feel it." Luke watched his daughter. Her scarf was still around the dog's neck, frayed now with blood. He looked back at Zoe. "She gonna make it?" Zoe hesitated. "She's got fight left, but she's holding on by instinct." Ellie reached out and brushed snow from the dog's ears. "What's her name?" Zoe asked softly. The little girl paused, then smiled. "Nova," she said. "It means a star that shines again." Luke exhaled slowly, the warmth from the clinic beginning to seep into his bones. But outside, through the glass, the storm still raged. And in the street across from the clinic, a black SUV idled with its headlights off. Watching, Nova let out a low whimper, barely audible, but her eyes never left the door. She was still guarding something, even if she was the one bleeding. Luke didn't know it yet, but the moment they pulled her from the snow, the war had already begun. The storm didn't let up. By morning, the snow had swallowed half the town, burying fences, mailboxes, even the street signs along Route 9. Power flickered on and off in the small veterinary clinic, casting long, jittery shadows across the examination room. Nova lay curled beneath a heat lamp, her breath still labored. Dried blood clung to the fur around her muzzle and legs. A small line of stitches marked her side, where Zoe had drained internal swelling. She hadn't made a sound since they arrived. Not a whine, not a growl, but her eyes never stopped watching. Zoe stood by the counter, shoulders stiff, examining a slide under the microscope. Her jaw clenched. Luke could see it from across the room. "What is it?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then she straightened, lifted a blood vial, and turned toward him. "There's something in her system," she said. "Actually, a lot of somethings. Elevated cortisol, artificial stimulants, traces of sedatives, and not the veterinary kind." Luke stepped closer. "You're saying someone was drugging her?" "Like clockwork," Zoe said. "Keep her awake, keep her hyper-alert, then knock her out. Rinse and repeat." "Why would anyone do that to a dog?" Zoe reached for the handheld microchip scanner and ran it over Nova's shoulder again. The same faint beep, same half-erased code. "This chip, it's not civilian, it's military grade, old but familiar. Some K9 units used them during federal operations a few years back, especially for tactical dogs, highly trained, specialized handlers." Luke crossed his arms. "So she's not a stray." "No," Zoe said quietly. "She's someone's asset." Nova shifted slightly on the blanket. A tremor ran through her limbs. Her breathing hitched but didn't break. Luke turned away, pulling out the blood-smeared phone he'd recovered the night before. He powered it on again. Battery at 2%. The cracked screen flickered once, then showed the same alert. "Cargo lost. Retrieve immediately." He called dispatch. "Put me through to Captain Dorsey." The hold music was brittle static. Finally, a click. "Barrett?" Dorsey's voice was already on edge. "Sir, I need to log an incident. We picked up a dog last night, female shepherd, injuries consistent with abuse and possible narcotic exposure. The location was the old sawmill near the ridge. There was a male suspect on scene who fled. I recovered a phone with encrypted messages." A pause. Then, flatly, "What's the condition of the animal?" "Stable for now. She's pregnant, near term." "You filed this in the system?" "I'm calling now to do that." There was a longer silence. "Don't," Dorsey said. Luke blinked. "Sir, you heard me. No paperwork, no statements. Not until the feds make contact. That's not procedure. It's an order." Click. Luke stared at the dead line, disbelief tightening his spine. Nova let out a low huff, like she understood every word. Zoe glanced up from her notes. "Let me guess. They want you to sit tight and stay quiet. Wants me to shut it down completely." Luke muttered. "No trace." Zoe tossed her pen onto the counter. "That's not normal." "No, it's not." He looked over at Nova. She was struggling to sit up. "Whoa, easy," Zoe said, rushing over. "She shouldn't be moving yet." But Nova didn't stop. She pushed herself to her feet, unsteady but upright. Her legs shook, her head dipped once, but she stood. Luke followed her gaze. Ellie. The little girl had slipped into the room again, cradling a children's book in her arms. She paused at the doorway, eyes wide, unsure if she should be there. Nova took one shaky step forward. Luke's heart thumped. Ellie smiled. "Hi, Nova." The dog's tail wagged once, then twice. She moved closer. Zoe didn't speak. She just stepped back. Nova limped across the room, slower than any dog Luke had ever seen. But she didn't stop until she was standing in front of Ellie. She dropped her head low and pressed her nose into the girl's palm. Ellie's breath caught. Then she knelt and hugged the shepherd's neck gently. "You're okay now," she whispered. Zoe blinked. "She's responding faster than I thought possible." "It's not just physical," Luke said. "She knows something. Or remembers something." Nova lowered herself to the floor beside Ellie, curling protectively around the girl like a worn shield. Luke's phone buzzed. He checked the screen. Blocked number. He let it ring. Across the room, Zoe opened a small drawer and pulled out a sterile tag, something used for temporary patient IDs. She clicked her pen and looked at Luke. "What should I write?" He glanced at Ellie, then at the dog curled beside her. "Nova," he said. "That's her name now." Zoe scribbled it down. "She's going to need a safe place. This storm's not going anywhere for a while." Luke nodded. "Neither is this story." He looked at the blood-streaked phone again, then back at Nova. "She didn't just survive," he murmured. "She brought something with her, something they're willing to hurt for." Outside, the snow beat against the windows like fists, but inside, a broken dog stood guard again, this time by choice. The snow didn't stop, but the silence did. Inside Zoe's clinic, the storm outside felt distant, almost irrelevant. The warmth of the recovery room, the soft hum of heaters, the quiet shuffle of a girl reading aloud to a dog, it was its own little island. But Luke Barrett knew better. Storms didn't disappear. They just shifted shape. Nova was recovering faster than anyone expected. Her stitches were holding, her breathing steadier. But what stood out most wasn't physical. It was the way she watched. She watched Ellie with quiet devotion, lifting her head whenever the girl entered the room, tracking her movements like a soldier standing guard. Even when Nova drifted off, her ears twitched toward the sound of Ellie's voice. It wasn't casual attention. It was instinct, and it hadn't dulled with injury. Ellie had made it her mission to stay close. She brought her stack of picture books from home, reading them to Nova from a beanbag chair beside the mat. Some were about brave wolves, some about stars, one about a dog who found her way back to her family after a fire. Nova listened to all of them, her tail thumping softly when Ellie's voice rose during the happy endings. But Luke wasn't resting. He sat at Zoe's cluttered desk in the back, the blood-smeared phone from the crime scene charging beside his laptop. The cracked screen had finally stabilized. No passcode, just chaos. Dozens of messages, encrypted strings, GPS tags, inventory references. One message kept surfacing. Cargo lost. Retrieve immediately. Luke frowned, scrolling past blocks of numbers. Most of them started with three-letter prefixes followed by digits. K9U23, K9L17, K9A02. He opened a secondary state law enforcement database. It had taken a few favors and a little creative logging, but he was in. He typed in the first string, K9U23. Status, decommissioned. Next one, K9L17. Status, missing. Handler deceased. Next, K9A02. Status, lost in field. Declared inactive. Every entry returned a similar note. Dogs that had once been federal assets. Gone, but not forgotten. He opened a file he hadn't touched in years, a quiet scandal, buried in bureaucracy. An entire unit of K9s that vanished after a program was shut down following budget cuts. Rumors had circled, but nothing was confirmed. No one wanted to look too hard. Until now. Zoe appeared behind him with a mug of coffee. She handed it to him wordlessly, then leaned over his shoulder. "What are those?" she asked. "IDs," Luke replied, from the phone. Matched them to old federal K9 designations. "Let me guess. Dogs that shouldn't exist anymore? Or shouldn't be turning up half-dead behind a sawmill in Everpine?" Zoe folded her arms. So Nova was part of something bigger. She was part of something gone wrong. Outside, a gust of wind slammed against the side of the clinic, rattling the window panes. Luke rubbed his eyes. Whoever used these dogs, they're trying to erase the evidence. Literally. Even Nova's chip was half-wiped. Zoe pointed to a line on the screen. "That one. K9E13. That prefix is different." Luke clicked on it. Status. Unknown. Redacted. Nothing else. Ellie poked her head into the office. "Dad?" Luke turned. "Can I sleep here tonight?" she asked. "Nova keeps getting up when I leave." Zoe smiled. "We can set up a cot in the back if it's okay with your dad." Luke hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just tonight." Ellie beamed and disappeared down the hall. Zoe watched him for a moment. "She needs something to believe in, you know." "I know. So do you." Later that night, the clinic quieted. Zoe headed home, promising to return at dawn. Luke stayed behind, sitting near the heater while Ellie curled up with a blanket beside Nova's mat. The dog rested with her muzzle between her paws, eyes open, tracking every creak in the walls. Outside, the snow had shifted to a soft drizzle. Freezing rain pecked at the roof. The storm's teeth had dulled, but the cold remained. Luke shut the laptop, rubbing the back of his neck. The same thought kept circling in his mind. Why Everpine? Why now? He checked the phone again. A new message had appeared. Tag compromised. Contain immediately. No location. No sender. Just a threat. He stood, stretching stiff limbs, and walked to the window, peering into the dark. Snowbanks shimmered under the floodlight. Nothing moved. The road was empty. Then Nova growled. Not a warning. A guttural, low vibration. Luke turned sharply. Nova had risen to her feet. Her ears were pinned forward. Her eyes locked on the rear of the clinic, toward the service hallway that led to the storage shed behind the building. She growled again, stepping in front of Ellie, placing her body between the child and the door. Luke's instincts fired. He grabbed his holstered sidearm and motioned silently for Ellie to stay down. He moved through the hallway quietly, boots landing light on the tile. At the back door, he paused. The lock was scratched. His eyes narrowed. Another growl, then a soft clatter from the shed. Luke threw open the door and stepped into the freezing air. The shed's side door swung on its hinge, open just an inch. Snow covered the threshold. No tracks. He approached slowly, gun raised. Police, step out now. Nothing. He kicked the door fully open. The shed was empty. No tools missing, nothing disturbed, except the faintest imprint of a boot in the snow, half hidden, melting at the edges. Back inside, Nova had returned to Ellie's side, but her tail was stiff, her eyes still locked on the door. Luke shut it behind him, bolted it tight, and drew the blinds. When he sat back down, Ellie whispered, "Was it a bad guy?" "I don't know," Luke said honestly. But Nova did. She looked at the dog, who now lay across her legs like a warm, silent shield. "She's not just a dog, is she?" "No," Luke said. "She's a survivor." He looked at the cracked phone screen one more time, and maybe the only witness left alive. It happened fast. The wind had died down just enough for footsteps to be heard. 3 distinct crunches on packed snow coming from the back of the clinic. Luke had been sitting at the front desk, flipping through old canine deployment files, when Nova's growl sliced through the quiet like a wire snap. It wasn't a warning. It was a signal. Something was wrong. He moved fast and silent, drawing his sidearm from the holster. Nova was already up, bristled and poised near the rear hallway. Ellie, startled awake from her nap on the floor mat, sat upright, clutching her blanket. Luke motioned toward her. "Stay here. Don't move." Nova didn't wait for instructions. She stalked ahead of him, her steps slow, deliberate. The hallway light flickered as they passed, casting shadows that twitched with the wind. At the rear service door, the lock was missing. Busted clean through! Luke kicked the door open and rushed outside. The man didn't get far. He was trying to scale the chain-link fence that bordered the snowdrift-covered alley. Luke sprinted through the powder and tackled him hard, both men going down in a mess of limbs and ice. The guy struggled, but Luke had the weight and years of training. Within seconds, he had the cuffs locked. "Police, you just made a mistake, friend." The man spat blood into the snow. His hoodie was soaked, his breath ragged. "Name?" Luke demanded. "Go to hell!" Nova stood behind him, growling, eyes locked onto the intruder with surgical intensity. Luke yanked the man to his feet and slammed him against the squad car. The light above the clinic flickered. Finally, under pressure, the man muttered, Tanner Briggs." Luke froze. That name rang a bell, a peripheral face in an old weapons trafficking investigation 5 years ago. Nothing ever stuck. But the tattoo on his neck was louder than any confession. A broken chain encircling a wolf skull. Luke had seen that ink before, on bodies, on wanted lists, on men who'd vanished before trial. Tanner squinted at Nova, who was now pacing just beyond his shoulder. "So that's the bitch." Luke's fist tightened. "Watch your mouth." Tanner sneered. "Didn't think she'd survive. Raw's gonna be pissed." Luke stepped back, the name stinging like a slap. "Silas Raw." Tanner gave a hollow laugh. "Didn't take long. Thought he was dead?" "Not dead, just rich enough to disappear." Raw had been on Luke's radar a decade ago, an arms dealer turned ghost, the kind of man who didn't run from justice. He outbid it. "Why the dog?" Luke asked. "Why Nova?" Tanner shifted in the cuffs. "She's cargo, wasn't supposed to be left behind." Luke's voice dropped. "Cargo for what?" A beat passed. Tanner glanced at the clinic windows, then back at Luke. "You think they're just dogs? They're couriers. Nobody checks the stomach of a K9. No one questions a service vest. You load them up with micro-compartments, cross them over backwoods routes, swap handlers along the way. Cleaner than drones, cheaper than people. Luke's jaw locked. And the drugs? Heroin, fentanyl, whatever pays. Most of the dogs don't last long. But Nova? She was special. Got pregnant mid-run. That screwed up her cycle, made her disposable. Luke felt a weight in his chest. He looked back, toward the clinic, where Ellie was probably now sitting beside Nova again, reading her latest fairy tale. She's not cargo. Luke said, she's evidence. Tanner laughed. She's a problem, and Raw doesn't like problems walking around with teeth. Luke slammed the trunk and opened the back seat. You just made yourself very useful. He radioed the sheriff's office. This is Officer Barrett. I have one in custody. Possible connection to an active narcotics and trafficking operation. Request secure transport and backup. Now. The dispatcher's voice came back, faint, crackling. Copy that. ETA 15 minutes. Luke returned to the clinic. Ellie met him in the hallway, eyes wide. Was someone here again? Yes, Luke said, but he won't be coming back. Nova stood beside her, still alert, still watchful. Zoe rushed in minutes later, hair tousled, holding a coat in one hand and a medkit in the other. I heard the radio call. You okay? Luke nodded. I need you to run something for me. He handed her a printed sheet from the system, serial codes from the phone they'd recovered. Can you cross-reference these with known veterinary microchip logs and any flagged K9 units that went off-grid in the last 5 years? Zoe's brows furrowed. You think Nova was part of something bigger? I know she was. He told them everything, about Tanner, the name Silas Raw, the use of K9s as drug mules. The room fell quiet. Zoe set down her kit. This is federal. Which is why they wanted me to bury it. Ellie looked between them, clutching Nova's neck. But she's good, she said softly. She saved me. Luke nodded. She's not just good. She's brave. And she's been used. Nova lifted her head, eyes locking with Luke's. I don't think she's done fighting, he said, and neither am I. Outside, the sound of sirens echoed faintly through the snow-covered hills. Nova didn't flinch. She stood. She faced the door. And she waited. The snow came back with a vengeance, as if the storm had only been resting, waiting for the right moment to strike. Luke stood in the sheriff's office, eyes locked on the captain who couldn't meet his gaze. The report in Luke's hand detailed everything. Tanner Briggs' confession, the erased chip in Nova's neck, the federal-grade K9 codes. All of it handed over, signed, sealed, and stamped with the truth. But truth, Luke was learning, wasn't always welcome. You went outside your jurisdiction, Captain Dorsey said, voice tight. Acted without authorization, no warrant, no federal liaison. Luke's hands curled into fists. A trafficked K9, a known felon with cartel ties, a child nearly in the crossfire. And you're worried about protocol? I'm worried about liability, Dorsey snapped. And the fact that now we're being watched. Do you know who you're poking at? This goes federal. Luke, you don't chase wolves through the woods unless you're ready to lose your badge. Luke stared at him for a long second, then placed the report down with slow, deliberate precision. So be it. That afternoon, he was officially suspended, effective immediately. No gun, no badge, no jurisdiction. Just a storm outside and a dog inside who had already survived more than most people could bear. When he returned to the clinic, the lights were dim, the backup generator kicking low under the strain. Zoe met him at the door, her eyes scanning his face before he even spoke. They pulled you. He nodded once. She didn't curse, just pressed her lips tight and led him inside. Nova was on the mat in the back room, breathing heavily. Her sides convulsed in uneven waves, belly rippling with the first signs of labor. Ellie knelt beside her, one hand on the dog's paw, the other holding a wool blanket. She's shaking, Ellie said. Is she scared? Zoe knelt to check her vitals. She's fighting. Luke crouched beside them. Nova turned her head slightly, her eyes locking onto his. No fear, just exhaustion. And resolve. A low rumble echoed outside, muffled by snow. Not thunder. Something else. Zoe looked up. You hear that? Luke moved to the window, brushing aside the curtain. Headlights. 3 black SUVs, no license plates, creeping through the snow like sharks beneath the surface. They found us. What do we do? Zoe asked. Luke didn't hesitate. We fight. She grabbed the emergency medkit. You're not a cop anymore. I'm still a father. Ellie stayed by Nova, even as the first gunshot shattered the front window. Down! Luke yelled, pulling Zoe behind the counter. Glass rained across the tiles. Wind and snow howled into the room. Shadows moved outside, gun barrels flashing under strobe lightning. Nova stood, trembling, teeth bared. But she didn't run. She positioned herself between Ellie and the shattered entrance, her body braced like a shield forged from instinct. She can't fight and give birth at the same time, Zoe shouted over the chaos. She won't stop, Ellie whispered. She's trying to protect us. Luke returned fire, taking down one silhouette that appeared in the snow-covered doorway. Another volley of shots rang out, one punching through the cabinet, grazing Zoe's shoulder. She flinched, clutching the wound but staying upright. They're pushing in, she cried. In the corner, Nova collapsed onto her side, panting hard. The first puppy came, slick and trembling, still curled in a fetal coil. Ellie moved on instinct, wrapping it in her scarf, whispering, It's okay, baby, you're safe. The second came seconds later, then a third. The room stank of gunpowder, blood, and new life. Nova whined but didn't stop. A man burst through the side door, rifle raised. Ellie screamed. Before Luke could turn, Nova lunged, wounded, exhausted, but feral. She slammed into the man's leg, knocking his shot off target. The bullet struck the ceiling. He shoved her away, raised the gun again. And then Luke fired. The man dropped. Nova staggered back toward Ellie, her body heaving, blood now blooming from her shoulder. No, Luke said, rushing to her. Stay with me. Come on, Nova. Ellie was sobbing, clutching the puppy against her chest. Zoe tore her sleeve and pressed it to Nova's wound. She took the shot for your daughter. Luke cradled the shepherd's head in his hands, her breath coming in rasps. You're not done, he whispered. Not yet. Nova blinked slowly, her eyes fluttering, but then she exhaled, and it wasn't surrender. It was a push. The fourth puppy came, the smallest, barely moving. Ellie held it close, wrapping it with both hands. This one's not breathing. Zoe grabbed a gauze pad, wiped its nose, gently rubbed its chest. The puppy let out a tiny broken whimper. It lived. Outside sirens wailed in the distance, backup finally cutting through the storm. Inside, Luke pressed his forehead to Nova's. You saved her, he whispered. You saved all of us. Nova's tail moved once, a flicker, not goodbye. Survival. As EMTs flooded in, carrying stretchers and shouting for clear lines of fire, Ellie stayed right where she was, curled beside Nova, puppies nestled between them, hands trembling but steady. She didn't run, Ellie whispered. She never would, Luke said. And in that moment, amid blood, snow, and broken glass, a battered German shepherd became something more than evidence. She became legend. Hope was the last to be born. She came out small, slick, and silent, so quiet that for a moment everyone in the clinic thought she hadn't made it. But then Ellie leaned close, cradled the tiny body in both hands, and whispered softly, You're not done yet. The puppy twitched, gasped, then let out the smallest broken whimper of life. That was enough. Ellie named her Hope before Zoe could finish drying her. Nova, weak and bloodied, curled around her pups in the far corner of the recovery room. One ear twitching every time the front door opened, her body still alert despite the blood loss. The bullet had missed her heart by half an inch. Zoe said it was a miracle. Luke said it was pure will. Ellie didn't care what anyone called it. Nova lived. So did her babies. The snow was finally starting to melt. Just a little, enough for the town to breathe again. But the tension hadn't melted from Luke's face. His suspension was still in place. The sheriff's department wasn't returning calls. Someone higher up had pulled the strings tight, and the phone taken from Tanner Briggs, now held in evidence lockup, had been wiped clean overnight. No message history, no tracking records, no fingerprints, erased like none of it ever existed. Still, Luke stayed near the clinic, watching the road, patrolling the edges of the property, checking the perimeter before bed. But he didn't check the desk drawer where Ellie had hidden the small black disc. It had fallen out the night of the attack, rattling onto the floor while Luke wrestled the weapon away from one of Raw's men. Ellie had scooped it up without thinking. It looked like a button, smooth and flat, with a tiny, blinking green dot. A GPS tag. It pulsed slowly now, steady as a heartbeat. Ellie stared at it from the blanket nest she'd made beside Nova's crate. Her fingers hovered over the single recessed button at its center. Zoe had fallen asleep at her desk. Luke was outside making another call. Nova raised her head. "You feel it too, don't you?" Ellie whispered. The dog didn't move, but her amber eyes locked on Ellie's hand. Then she stood, stiff, cautious, but strong. Ellie rose and grabbed her red coat. They left through the side door, where the snow was lower now and the trail led into the woods. Ellie stuffed the GPS tag in her pocket, one hand gripping the flashlight her father had given her last summer. She clicked it once, dim. Twice, brighter. She clicked it a third time. Then stepped into the trees. Nova stayed close, walking shoulder to shoulder with the girl, ears turning with every sound. The moon wasn't out. The path was only a memory between the trees, but Ellie followed the blinking signal on the GPS. Every few minutes it pulsed, closer now. "Almost there," Ellie whispered. "We're just looking. We'll come back. We have to see what it is first." Nova snorted softly, as if acknowledging the plan but reserving judgment. After 20 minutes of trudging, the signal stopped blinking. Ellie looked up. Through the trees, barely visible behind a rusted metal fence, sat what used to be a hunting cabin. The windows were shattered, the roof half-caved. Burn marks scarred the outer wall, like it had once caught fire and no one bothered to fix it. But the glow of a low battery light blinked behind a boarded-up window. Nova tensed, growled low. Ellie dropped to her knees behind a fallen tree. Inside, a voice, weak, cracked, echoed just loud enough to hear. "Help! Please! Someone!" Ellie's eyes went wide. She looked through a crack in the fence and saw her. A woman, tied to a chair, dirty coat, broken glasses, hair matted to one side. Her arms were bound to the chair legs, a gash on her forehead dried and dark. But her mouth was moving, whispering the same word over and over. "Please!" Ellie fumbled with the flashlight. 3 quick clicks. Her father had taught her the signal years ago, back when they used to camp, before Mom got sick. 3 flashes. Then a pause. Then 3 more. The international sign for SOS. Nova crept forward, watching the tree line behind them. Alert. Ready. Ellie stayed crouched, heart pounding in her chest, eyes locked on the door of the cabin. Someone had been here recently. Fresh boot prints, cigarette butts in a snow-dampened ashtray. Bag of empty syringes left beside a cage. She didn't understand all of it, but she knew this woman was important. The woman's coat had a badge sewn into the collar. Ellie could only make out 2 words through the soot and grime. Federal agent. Ellie whispered into Nova's ear. "We found her." Nova let out a low whuff of agreement. Back at the clinic, Luke realized the side door was open, and his daughter was gone. But already in the dark of the woods, a signal had gone out. 3 blinks of light through the branches, and one brave girl standing exactly where her father had taught her to be, between the danger and the truth, with a dog who never ran. The forest never echoed so loudly. Luke burst through the underbrush, the GPS tracker in his hand blinking furiously. The signal Ellie had sent, 3 short pulses, was still bouncing from the ridge ahead. Every step through the snow felt like a lifetime. Every second she was out there alone cracked something deeper inside him. He had backup this time. State troopers. A tactical response team from the county. And Zoe, refusing to stay behind, riding shotgun with a medical pack slung over her shoulder. "Half a click ahead," one of the officers said, scanning the tablet. "There's a cabin." Luke barked. "Abandoned. Burned years ago. It's the only place Raw's crew could hole up without drawing attention." The convoy of snowmobiles pulled to a halt. Boots hit snow, weapons checked, orders whispered, and then movement, a flicker of light through the trees. Faint, blinking, familiar. Luke raised his binoculars. 3 flashes. Pause. 3 more. Ellie's signal. Just like he taught her. God, she remembered. He didn't wait for orders. He moved. The team followed, sweeping wide in a flanking pattern. The cabin emerged through the trees like a wounded animal. Half-collapsed roof, boarded windows, a thin wisp of smoke curling from a chimney that shouldn't have been active. Someone was home. Inside, Ellie crouched beside Nova behind a broken shelf. The shepherd was growling low, blood trickling from her previous wounds, reopened during the journey. But she didn't flinch. She watched the doorway, muscles coiled like springs. Across the room, Agent Kendra Ash was still tied to a chair, head slumped, barely conscious. One man stood guard with a pistol resting on his thigh. Another argued by the radio, shouting into static. "She sent a signal," he snapped. "She's just a kid. Find her." A third man moved toward the back, rifle raised. That's when Nova moved. She didn't bark. She launched. A streak of black and silver across the floor, teeth flashing, body colliding with the man mid-stride. He screamed, firing wildly into the air. The other men scrambled. Outside, Luke heard the shot, and then his daughter's voice. "Nova!" He kicked the door open, gun drawn, eyes sweeping. Chaos. Nova wrestled the gunman to the floor. The second man turned, raised his weapon at her, and Luke shot him first. The third ran for the rear exit. A trooper caught him before he made it through the trees. "Ellie!" Luke called. "Dad!" She ran from the corner, wrapped in Nova's blood-slicked fur, tears streaming down her face. He dropped his gun, caught her mid-run, arms tightening like he'd never let her go again. "You okay?" he whispered. She nodded. "Nova found her. The agent. She's hurt." Luke crossed to Kendra Ash, cutting the ropes. Her eyes blinked open slowly, dry lips parting. "You're late," she rasped. He couldn't help the ghost of a smile. "Sorry, weather's hell." Behind them, flames crackled. A stray round had hit one of the propane heaters, and fire now licked up the cabin wall. "Get them out!" Luke shouted. "Now!" Outside, snow flurried as more officers rushed in, dragging out hard drives, folders, whatever data hadn't already burned. Nova limped behind Ellie, one paw lifted slightly from the snow. Blood darkened her shoulder. Again. Zoe rushed over. "It's shallow," she confirmed. "But she needs stitches. Again." Nova didn't resist. She just looked up at Ellie and gave a single soft whine. Ellie dropped to her knees and hugged her. "You did it," the girl whispered. "You saved us again." The fire behind them roared. But this time, it wasn't the kind that devoured. It was the kind that cleared. 2 hours later, with Ash stabilized and data secured, the real shock came, not from the fire, but from the names inside the files. Silas Raw. Real name. Affiliates. Roots. Tactical K9 units assigned and retired off the books. Evidence of microchip alterations. Medical logs showing the injection of narcotics and the implantation of smuggling compartments. Images, charts, maps. One folder labeled Disposable Assets. That's what they called the pregnant ones. That's what they called Nova. It was enough. Federal warrants came down within the hour. Raw was captured in a warehouse outside Detroit the next morning, trying to torch the last of his records. His arrest made headlines. Luke's name didn't. But that didn't matter. His suspension was lifted quietly, a terse phone call from the same captain who once told him to stay quiet. "You're reinstated," Dorsey said. "But off the record. Maybe lay low." Luke looked out the window of the clinic, where Nova lay curled around her pups, all four safe, breathing, warm. "I'll take it under advisement," he said. He hung up the phone. Zoe leaned in the doorway. "So you're back?" "I never really left." She nodded. "Ellie's outside. She said Nova should get a badge." Luke smiled. "She already earned it. More than I ever did." He walked outside and found them by the fence. Nova lifted her head as he approached. Luke knelt, ran a hand through her fur, still matted but soft. "You did good, girl," he said. "Real good." She licked his hand once, then rested her head on Hope's tiny back. And for the first time since the storm began, justice didn't feel like a badge or a courtroom. It felt like this: warm breath, safe hands, and a second chance bought by loyalty that never blinked. 6 months had passed since the storm. The snow that once buried the town in silence had melted into streams that trickled through the gutters and whispered beneath the pine roots. Spring had returned to Everpine, not loud or triumphant, but soft, like someone tiptoeing back after too long away. Where Zoe's old kennel once stood, now sat a fresh-painted wooden sign, swaying gently in the breeze. Everpine K9 Rescue Center underneath, in smaller lettering, "For those left behind, for those who fought to return." The transformation was subtle but real. The rusty fencing had been replaced with cedar pickets. Warm lights glowed from the inside of the remodeled barn. Clean straw lined the runs, and each dog had a nameplate on their kennel, not a number. Nova didn't have a kennel. She had a bed by the window, a paw-shaped patch on the rug where the sun hit hardest in the afternoons. The scar on her shoulder was barely visible beneath her silver-black fur, and when she walked, she carried herself with the slow, steady dignity of a survivor who no longer needed to prove anything. Her 4 pups had grown into distinct personalities. Hope, the smallest, still trailed behind her mother like a shadow, her ears too big for her head and her legs all angles. Courage, Bramble, and Scout had been adopted by families from surrounding towns. But Hope stayed. She was Ellie's. Every morning, Ellie sat on the porch steps of the rescue center with a stack of books and a thermos of cocoa. One by one, the dogs would come to her, curious or lonely or simply drawn by her voice. She read to them, old fairy tales, dog training manuals, sometimes even her dad's police reports. "They like the stories," she told Luke one afternoon. "Even the sad ones, especially the ones where someone gets found." Luke didn't wear the badge anymore. He still carried it in his wallet, but most days he was content to work the perimeter fence, fix broken latches, or help Zoe with intake forms. Peace, he'd learned, didn't always wear a uniform. People came from all over now, not just to adopt dogs, but to ask questions. About Nova, about what happened during the blizzard. Some had seen her photo in a newspaper, others had only heard rumors. The volunteers told the story like a legend. How a German shepherd, shot and pregnant, fought through a snowstorm to protect a little girl. How she gave birth while gunfire cracked around her. How she tracked down a federal agent and helped bring down a trafficking ring. Some stories are exaggerated over time, but not this one, because the dog was still here, and every time a new visitor entered the gates, they'd hear her low bark from the yard. Not a threat, not a demand, just a reminder. One afternoon, a woman arrived with a boy no older than 7. He didn't speak much. Zoe guessed maybe a foster situation, maybe worse. But when Nova walked toward him, slow and careful, and nudged his elbow, something opened in the child's face. Not a smile, not yet, but a kind of softening, like the first thaw after a hard frost. The woman asked, "What's her story?" Zoe answered without hesitation. She didn't bark for food, she barked for the truth. Luke watched from the porch, arms folded. Ellie leaned her head against his arm. "She still listens at night," she said, "even when everything's quiet." "She's still guarding," Luke replied, and he knew it was true. The storm had come and gone, the wounds had scabbed over, but in the hearts of those who survived, Nova, Ellie, Zoe, even him, something had shifted. They no longer looked for trouble, but they no longer looked away from it, either, because truth, like loyalty, has a sound. And Nova never stopped barking for it. They arrived in a yellow school bus, with clipboards and cameras and wide, skeptical eyes. 15 students from a media magnet school in the city, bundled in mismatched jackets, talking too loud, their boots crunching across the gravel lot of Everpine Canine Rescue. Most of them had never seen a real barn that wasn't on a screen. Fewer still had touched a dog that wasn't leashed in a park or part of a therapy program. But they were here on assignment, how rescue dogs shape human communities. Zoe gave the welcome tour. Luke stood at the edge, hands in his jacket pockets, watching Ellie as she led the students to the main yard. Nova was already waiting. The shepherd rose slowly from her sun-warmed spot beneath the awning. She didn't bark. She didn't rush. She simply walked out, calm and deliberate, and the kids fell silent, their phones lowering without instruction. "Is that her?" one of the girls whispered. Ellie nodded. "That's Nova." A boy with shaggy hair and a film badge leaned toward her. "You mean the one from the article? The blizzard? The bust?" "She's the one," Ellie said. "But she's not a story. She's our family." The group gathered in a semicircle, and Ellie sat cross-legged in the grass, motioning for Nova to lie beside her. The dogs surrounded them, Hope, Courage, and 2 new rescues still learning to trust people. Cameras rolled, pens scribbled. "People say dogs can't talk," Ellie began, "but that's only if you're not listening. Nova talks all the time. She talks with her ears, her tail, her feet. Her bark is the last part. That's when you really need to hear her." A boy raised his hand like he was in class. "How do you know when a dog's telling the truth?" Ellie smiled. "They always are. That's the difference." The lead teacher, Ms. Hartley, watched quietly from near the barn. Her eyes softened with something between wonder and nostalgia. Luke leaned against the fence, watching the students ask Ellie about instincts and warning signs, about how Nova had known where to go that night in the woods. And then one girl asked, "Did Nova save your life?" Ellie looked down at the dog curled beside her. "She saved more than that," she said. "She saved how I think about people, and how I think about silence. Not all of it's empty. Sometimes it's just waiting." Inside the office, Zoe prepped coffee for the chaperones, while Luke sat down for the formal interview. A junior reporter named Mason clipped a small mic to his collar and started recording. "Mr. Barrett," Mason said. If there's one thing Nova did, just one, that you'd want the world to remember, what would it be?" Luke didn't speak right away. He looked out the window where Nova was letting a second grader carefully brush her back with a soft comb. Hope lay curled by Ellie's feet, fast asleep. "She saved more than us," he finally said. "She saved what we forgot to believe in." Mason blinked. "Which is?" "Instinct, loyalty, quiet bravery, that the truth doesn't always need to shout to be real." The footage aired 2 weeks later as a short-form digital docu-series titled Guardians Without Words. The piece went viral, not because of gunfights or headlines, but because of Nova's eyes. Still, watching, knowing. The moment where Ellie whispered, "She never ran, not once." The moment where Luke said, "Justice isn't paperwork. Sometimes it's a bark that interrupts a lie." Requests flooded in. Other towns, other counties, messages from shelters asking how to train rescue dogs to detect distress, PTSD support groups asking how to build what Everpine built. A centre opened in Ash Hollow, then 2 more in Pine Bridge and Elmsway. They didn't name them after Nova, but in each one, her story was told. Sometimes by volunteers, sometimes by Ellie herself through a live stream, where she read from her worn journal and let hope curl in her lap while she spoke. They never tried to make Nova a symbol. She simply became one. And not because she was loud, but because she never had to be. The morning came slow and quiet, the way early winter mornings tend to do in small towns like Everpine. Frost glazed the windows of the rescue centre. The ground crunched under every step. Breath rose in clouds that drifted toward the pines, and the sun, low and gold, slipped over the mountains like it had forgotten how to shine. Luke Barrett sat on the front steps of the rescue centre, a cup of coffee cooling between his hands. He wasn't in uniform. He hadn't been for a while now. These days, he traded his badge for boots, paperwork for hay bales, sirens for soft barks at dawn. Beside him, Nova lay curled close, head lifted, eyes sharp. Her muzzle had greyed more in recent months, and she moved slower now. But her ears still turned with every distant sound, and she always slept facing the door, still guarding. A breeze passed through the valley, bringing the scent of wood smoke, cedar, and wet earth. The kind of smell that reminded Luke more of home than any address ever could. The creak of the gate caught his ear. A boy stood there, no more than 9, with a backpack slung crooked over one shoulder and curiosity in his eyes. Luke waved him in. The boy hesitated, then stepped closer, staring at the shepherd stretched across the porch. "Is that the dog from the rescue story?" he asked. Luke looked down at Nova. She didn't move, just blinked slowly like she was used to the attention. "She didn't just survive," Luke said, voice low. "She brought someone back from the storm." The boy sat cross-legged on the top step without asking. "They told us in school she saved people, even a baby." Luke smiled faintly. "A little girl. Not a baby. That little girl saved her too." The boy looked over. "Where is she now?" "She reads to the new dogs in the afternoons," Luke said. "She says their ears understand better than their eyes ever could." The boy nodded like that made perfect sense. From inside the rescue centre, the soft static of an old radio crackled to life. A voice came through, warm, steady, familiar. "Tonight, across the state, we honor a dog who didn't bark for food, but for the forgotten. For the ones no one noticed, no one named, no one listened to. For every story that needed teeth to protect it. What's your story with a loyal pet?" The boy looked at Nova. "She still listens." Luke didn't answer. He didn't have to. Nova's ears twitched toward the radio, then toward the woods, then back toward the boy. Watching. Always. The boy leaned in. "I'm going to bring my dog next time. He's scared of fireworks." She'll know how to talk to him. Luke said. A car pulled into the gravel lot. A family stepped out, holding a leash. Another adoption, probably. Another goodbye. Another beginning. Luke stood slowly. Nova pushed herself upright beside him, joints stiff but steady. The boy ran off, calling a goodbye over his shoulder. Luke watched him go, then looked down at the shepherd. "You're still guarding, huh, girl?" Nova didn't bark. She didn't need to. She walked to the edge of the porch, sat by the gate, and watched as the world kept moving. Later that evening, as the last of the light dipped behind the hills, Ellie read a story to a new arrival. Another shepherd with a torn ear and eyes full of fear. Hope lay beside her, and Nova, as always, kept one eye open from across the room. Luke leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. Zoe passed him a mug of tea. "Same story again?" He nodded. "And she always adds a new line." Zoe smiled. "That's how stories grow." Outside, the wind picked up. The first flakes of the next storm whispered through the pines. But no one inside the rescue center stirred. Not because they weren't listening, because Nova already was. And somewhere, someone else would be too. If this story stirred something in you, if you believe dogs like Nova deserve more than just survival, if you've ever been saved by loyalty, instinct, or unconditional love, then share this story. Subscribe to German Shepherd Stories for more tales of courage, healing, and second chances. And tell us in the comments, what's your story with a loyal pet?